All right, there we go.
All right, thank you so much, Don. And thank you all to the Oak Center. It's good to see so many people I know. Most of what I'm going to be sharing is kind of background philosophy, and then we'll move to the practical. And so I did this looking at it kind of, I have a background in healthcare, and so I'm going to use some healthcare analogies as we go through.
Yes.
And so I'll be sharing kind of the PowerPoint. I'll move kind of quickly. Most of this is in the PowerPoint. So if there's anything at any point, go ahead and feel free to ask a question and jump in. Some of this for some of you is going to be new information, but for most who's in here probably has a pretty deep understanding of what we're going to be sharing, especially the areas in worldview. Yes. So again, my name is Dave McDonald. I've worked with Vishal for over 15 years. For those of you know Vishal. And the goal is what we want to do is restore health to multi-generational discipleship. And this will make a lot more sense halfway through kind of what we're talking about in this age of chaos. So I want to talk about what is biblical spiritual health. And for that, I'm just going to use the term biblical worldview. So if we look at Romans 12, it says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So we see sacrifice, holiness, spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And so we see a changing, a renewing of the mind. So in this picture, we see two tongues. The upper tongue is has a small lesion on it. It is a kind of a white ring with a red center. The lower tongue, you see kind of a red ring with a white center. And so when I think about worldview and how do we transform culture, transform nations, make flourishing nations, we have to understand the nature of what's going wrong in the nation. Both of these tongues look very similar. However, the upper tongue is something called squamous cell carcinoma, and over 90% of the people will be dead in 5 years with that diagnosis. The lower tongue is just a tongue bite, and that will resolve in about 10 days. What's happened with much of how the church and how families have treated education is actually they've treated education, and the problems with education is the lower tongue bite, rather than the cancer it has become. So when we start to evaluate worldview, what is coming through multi-generational discipleship, we have to first understand what's healthy. We can't understand a disease until we understand what's healthy. We need a proper understanding of many diseases before we can actually make a diagnosis. And we can't have a treatment until we have a diagnosis. Sadly, as I speak to parents, parent groups across the country, what we're finding is people are waking up and wondering, what kind of world am I living in? How did we get here? What is going on in this chaos? People are depressed and struggling to kind of see. So I want to ask, do we have a loving worldview? And it isn't that loving equals necessarily tolerance, but we need to understand the end result of an oncologist at the upper picture of that tongue. If they just wanted to be kind to the person and they didn't want the person to be sad, they might never tell them about their disease. But to have a loving worldview is to tell the truth about the disease that's happening. Proverbs says, there's a way that seems right to man, but the end is the way of death. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. We know the wages of sin is death, and this is an eternal death. This is so much more serious than cancer. So when we look at the symptoms, I think one of the best reports out there was actually done fairly recently by George Barna. I can get you a copy of it for anybody who wants it. It's called Millennials in America, New Insights into the Generation of Growing Influence. What they highlight in this, I think it's 150 pages or so, is the faith gap between millennials and two earlier generations is the widest intergenerational difference identified anytime in the last 7 decades. I also believe that that's how long they've been tracking it. So this intergenerational difference could be the greatest we're seeing in much, much longer than that. What do we mean by an intergenerational difference? So how much millennials trust influencers to tell the truth or to do what's right? In this, they point out, and I aggregated, so anything that was sometimes or always, anything that was positive, millennials trust their friends about 76% of the time, it said. College professors, 2/3. Pastors, now they only trust just over half the time. This has been a radical shift over time. No longer are Christian leaders considered truth tellers. So we're going to be talking about the father of lies and truth as we move forward. 50% of boomers, those are people born between 46 and 64, believe that human life is sacred. Only 19% of millennials. Massive shift. How many millennials prefer socialism to capitalism? They have 3 different polling dates. So from 2017 to 2021, in this 4 years, each year, basically, they've lost a percentage. This is how fast things are changing. 4% in 4 years. The really kind of shocking statistic, not so shocking for myself. Most of my life, most of my speaking, I was out in the Pacific Northwest. It tends to be 20 years ahead of a lot of the country. And so my kids went to graduate school in San Francisco. And so sometimes I joke that I'm from the future when I'm speaking in the Midwest. However, I would say for you Canadians, on some of the things you guys are actually leading the world in your progressiveness. But Newsweek reported, this is from February 18th, nearly 40% of US Gen Zs and 30% of young Christians now identify as LGBTQ. And I want to let that sink in. You know, that's roughly 1/3 of young Christians identify in this this group. And so where is this coming from? They want to be part of something. What is causing this? A lot of times when I was a young kid, we put so much emphasis on media. And media certainly was a driver, but we're going to be talking about what drove media.
Right.
And so this photo was taken about 25 years ago. It is Bono and Liam Gallagher, basically tongue kissing each other and opening. If most of you are familiar, it claimed to be a Christian band. But we were seeing these things happening. These are the things that were being poured into my generation. And now we're seeing the outpouring of this down the road. So when we look at modern artists, Taylor Swift, if you ask sadly, if I went into a youth group really across the West, I would even say in Africa, many people would be listening to Taylor Swift. And this is her from her video, You Need to Calm Down, her kind of representation of Christians. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And what she's done is created a caricature of what Christians Christians who stand for a biblical worldview of God's first government, the family, of what they really look like. And so hundreds of millions of people have downloaded and watched this caricature of Christians. It's a worldwide phenomenon. A lot of people don't understand how far this is going. Really, Korea, in some ways, through K-pop, is pushing the transgender envelope as well as anyone. Their band BTS is probably the biggest now band in the world. They hold the current record for most video viewed in a 24-hour period, more than any other artist in the history of time. And one day they had 113 million people look at this. Their goal is to blur the lines between femininity and masculinity. And so we won't get into the history of these gender ideologies and kind of some of the things that have come from Eastern religions. But for certain, one of the things is this is not a unique problem to North America. They are a product of multi-generational discipleship, so they can wear corsets, fishnet, and makeup and have literally billions of views. And so this is permeating. How does this happen now? What does this look like when you turn to Christian culture? LGBT artist, her name is Semler, twice last year was #1 on iTunes for Christian charts. She beat out Lauren Daigle, Maverick City Music, and a lot of the people we know. And her single Preacher's Kid stayed at #1, I think, for 2 weeks. And what does this represent as far as a worldview? So this is one of her songs. She said, the first song I learned spoke of Bethlehem. So it's probably, little town of Bethlehem about Jesus. So is that prophecy or is that brainwashing? Her father, by the way, was a pastor. My dad never cursed in his life. I asked if he smoked. He said twice. Well, by that standard, I'm a God blank failure. I passed my blunts, that's marijuana, the day I married my wife. I'm saying F a savior, and if she can't take it, then she's small. I'm going to ask a lot of questions because I'm giving it my all. The people preaching now, well, they've been putting us through blank. The mission trips are scams. They do more harm than good. We got fame-hungry pastors making bank in Hollywood. So that's #1 Christian chart artist, Semler, who's also touring with one of the #1 bands of my generation called Reliant K. Here is her tweet, and I want you to look at the date. This is March 13th. Today is the 16th, 3 days ago. She goes, remember when I was doing TikTok covers of Reliant K and calling it Reliant Gay? And now I'm on tour with Reliant K. So these are symptoms, these are real problems that are happening within Christian circles. These are not outliers. We can always find these things that are way out, but we're talking about mainstream Christian youth. This is the symptoms that we are seeing. So I want to talk about and define what I call multi-generational discipleship. And so very classic verse. And these things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to reliable people who will be qualified to teach others. This was laid out as a way to disseminate an information and a worldview. And it's a 4-generation discipleship model. And so the things Paul is speaking to Timothy. So Paul is kind of like the first generation. Timothy is the second generation. In the presence of many witnesses, he's to entrust to reliable people. That would be the 3rd generation who will be qualified to teach others. That's the 4th generation. So when I talk about multi-generational discipleship, I'm talking about Paul is teaching Timothy. Timothy is teaching what I call pastors and teachers who will be qualified to teach others. These are the end students. This is an excellent model for transforming culture. And so this model has been twisted, has been misapplied. And so the new model that's been used, I would say, to transform cultures is the Paul and Timothy's are university and higher education professors. Their reliable people are teachers who have been trained at the higher education, and the others are the students. And so these teachers who have come out of these higher education institutions now are they've totally infused our K through 12 schools, and our others, our students, are coming out with these university professors of higher education, whether it's Marxist critical theory all of these things that we can get into, we are now seeing this multi-generational discipleship infuse in culture, infuse in legislation, infuse in all sorts of other things. So this is kind of the heartbeat, however, of the third education revolution, is how do we take back this ecosystem so that now we can transform nations into flourishing nations and transform culture. So apathy, the abdication of education's discipleship, has had dire consequences many times. Christians in Germany after World War II asked the same thing that parents today are asking. Dr. Viktor Frankl, one of my heroes, he's both an MD and a PhD, very famously said, he was a Auschwitz survivor. He said, I'm absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz were ultimately not prepared in some ministry in Berlin, but where? Rather at the desk and lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. Legislation is always downstream of worldview. I totally agree with what he said. Even Hitler understood this. So you have the kind of the head of the concentration camp and the survivor. Hitler said, nothing makes me more certain of the victory of our ideas than our success in universities. Stalin understood this. He understood education as a tool, but he said it's a weaponized tool. Education is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in its hands and who it is aimed. Abraham Lincoln also mirrored the same thing. He said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation is going to be the philosophy of government in the next. We are seeing this absolutely play out in front of us. Jesus Christ, however, said it a little bit different, and I love how he put it. He said, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they both not fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. And so this is what we're seeing in this model. It's both good news and bad news. This is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. We read in Judges 2, when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord their God, the Lord God of their fathers, and followed after other gods from among the gods of the people who are all around them. It's recorded in Hosea, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Why are they destroyed for lack of knowledge? It's because they rejected knowledge. What the church has done by swinging to an emotive response for a closeness to God, instead of digging deep, is an active rejection of knowledge. It says, I will reject you from being a priest to me, and since you've forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. Over 80% of the following generation will not be walking with the things of God. They will absolutely be walking away unless something changed. Right now, it's between, depending on what study you believe, between about 75 and 82% are the fall away rate. So we have two things that we need to compare. We have a loving Father in heaven versus a lying, roaring lion. And so we need to understand who the fight is. We need to understand the tools that the enemy used. So casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. We need to be sober-minded and watchful. Our adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour. We need to resist him and stand firm in the faith. So who is the enemy? The enemy really isn't Karl Marx. That's a tool. Narcissism isn't the enemy. It's a tool. These worldviews are tools used by Satan. Education is the vehicle for delivering these tools. What happens, however, is when these worldviews infuse governments, Proverbs says, like a roaring lion, and I think that this is potentially Peter may have had an allusion to this, or a charging bear is a wicked ruler over a helpless people. We saw what happened in Canada. We don't like what you want. We're going to use emergency war powers over a peaceful protest. The devil, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. The devil is a liar. So when I see a lot of these worldviews, and I wonder what is behind them. How can a boy be a girl? Well, we know that this is nothing new. So the roaring lion is a destroyer and liar. He seeks to ruin God's first government, the family. See, ruining the family ruins the original discipleship model. He also wants to ruin the church. This is the vehicle to disciple nations. When we read, go there, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. See, the nations actually will be discipled literally by the church, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them. This is education to observe all that I have commanded to you. Adolf Hitler, I believe, had a higher view of children than the average church does. I want to say this again. This is kind of striking. A lot of times from the pulpit, we mock teenagers. We say, oh, you need a break. Make sure you get your mommy time. Make sure you get your daddy time. What did Adolf Hitler say the value of children is? He said, the state must proclaim the truth that the child is the most valuable possession a people can have. In this matter, the state must assert itself as the trustee of a millennial future in the face of which the egotistical desires of the individual count for nothing and will have to give way before the ruling of the state. Would it be that mothers, fathers, pastors, would state this: we must proclaim the truth that the child is the most valuable possession that we have. In this matter, the church, this family, must assert itself as the trustee of something given by God, in the face of which our egotistical desires count for nothing. We will do whatever we can to disciple the next generation. This, the devil understands. He mocked Christians, really is what he was doing. He mocked the family on his famous May Day speech in 1933. He said, when an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in a new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community. This is the exact same thing. They don't really care anymore about the church. The church is almost irrelevant. If I go and I talk to radical leftist professors, they almost think it's funny because they know it really doesn't mean anything. Marx and Engels. This goes way back in education. This is probably one of his more famous sayings. Religion is what? The opium of the people. We want to sweep away everything that claims to be supernatural and superhuman. So when we take the Bible as divine revelation, they want to sweep this away. For that reason, we have once and for all declared what? War on religion and religious ideas, and care little whether we're called atheists or anything else. But what happens in Christianity is we don't want to declare war on Satan and on the tools he's using. We care very much what people think of us. We care very much. We want to be liked. But listen to what they said. We're declaring war on religion. We don't care what you call us. Would that be said of Christians? Would we be like what happened in Acts when they were mocking them and they called them little Christ in Antioch? That should be our heartbeat. We should not care about our reputation as long as our reputation is that following Christ. The Communist Manifesto, they've written this down for us. The education of all children from the moment they can get along without a mother's care shall be in state institution at state expense. This is the idea. Why do they want this? Why do they not want this, a mother educating her child? So let's look at this was January 15th, the Michigan Democratic Party. I'm not sure where this parent should control what's taught in schools because there are kids is originating. Well, why would you say that if you were leading the Michigan Democratic Party and you were on their Instagram? Well, the reason why is you would have been trained in a university in Marxist ideas that the child is a product of the state, not of God's first government. So you wouldn't understand this. But parents do have an option to choose their sons to send their kids to a hand-selected private school at their own expense if they want. What is the purpose of public education? They're just putting this out there for everyone to see. And a public school is to not teach only what parents want them to be taught. It's to teach them what society needs them to know. This is mirroring Marx and Engels. This is mirroring all of these things before. The client of the public school is not the parent, but the community, the public. Now you say, wow, is legislation putting this? No, this is a worldview that's come from higher education that's been taught to these people. It's taken multi-generations to get to it, and now we're seeing the symptoms of it. Saul Alinsky, he was a very famous Marxist. Quite a few people know about him. A number of people don't. But he said, a Marxist begins with his prime truth that all evils are caused by the exploitation of the proletariat by capitalists. Now, he's actually a little bit incorrect, but critical theory, and we're seeing now critical race theory, really is this Marxist idea. And it's really the idea that there are oppressors and oppressed. And so Marxist economic theory, Saul Alinsky is totally correct, that it's exploitation of the proletariat by capitalists. But critical theory, which is the Marxist idea, is essentially the same thing. From this, he logically proceeded that proceeds to the revolution to end capitalism. Then in the third stage of reorganization into a new social order of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And finally, in the last stage, the political paradise of communism. This is why you see now almost half of all millennials want socialism in the West, 48%. And right now, what they're trying to do is a dictatorship, cancelization of anyone who disagrees with them, of the dictatorship of the proletariat. They have laid out their game plan, for over, really, I would say over 100 years of how to change this, and we've largely ignored it. Alinsky's influence is massive. This is what, was said. It is very important the way he is. If the ideals Alinsky espoused were actualized, his result would be a social revolution. As such, he's been feared. I want to read this again. If the ideals of Alinsky espoused were actualized, his result would be a social revolution. As such, he's been feared. Who said this? Well, this was Hillary Clinton. This is actually her thesis at Wesley College. This is her senior thesis. This is the actual from page 74. I got a copy of her thesis. There is only the fight, the analysis of the Alinsky model. So when Hillary Clinton was way back being trained by her Paul and Timothy's, what was the goal that Hillary Clinton was espousing? Social revolution, social re-engineering. This is nothing new. So when we fast forward now and we look a couple of what I'm going to call diabolical spiritual generations later, this is what was actually happened. We have seen in our lifetime a social re-engineering, a social revolution. So his most famous book, Alinsky's book, is called Rules for Radicals. And he spells this out. Again, we're going back, I think this is, late 60s, 70s. The essence This is what he says on there on page 37 and 38. The essence of Lenin's speeches during this period was they have the guns, and therefore we are for peace and reformation through the ballot. When we have the guns, then it will be through the bullet. And it was. Let us examine the case. First, Gandhi, like any other leader in the field of social action, was compelled to examine the means at hand. If he had guns, he might as well use them in an armed revolution. So when we see the raised fist of Black Lives Matter, social things like that, and we see people in the media who have gone through this indoctrination, this multi-generational thing, and we see a CNN reporter standing in front of buildings that have burned, and he says, this is mostly a peaceful protest. Who is he serving? This is the father of lies, coming straight from these Marxist tools in order for social re-engineering from higher education. 1972, Alinsky said very famously, the most effective means are whatever will achieve the desired results. And so this is what we are getting. Interestingly, if you buy this book, and if you can get a copy of the 1971, which is one of the earliest editions, and you look at his dedication page, Alinsky dedicated Rules for Radicals. He said, lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement of the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins. Or which is which, the very first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did so effectively that at least he won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Now, since then, this dedication has been removed from Rules for Radical. But if you want to look at the 1971 edition that he did, you can see he dedicated this. And so the question remains, how many churches, how many families in the mid-70s were talking about the diabolical plans of multi-generational that we're seeing now 50 years later? So what happens with these people? Well, they get schools named after them. Saul Alinsky Elementary School. This is how we honor America's radicals and reformers. This is why you see them wanting to take down anything that would memorialize somebody with a biblical worldview. This is why we remove statues, we remove names. These are the things we want to do. And what they want to do is they want to remove those things in order to memorialize these other people. So if you look at Baynard Rushton, massive influence on education, 1963. And so we're going now, 2013, that'd be 40, 50, 60 years. He said the barometer for judging the character of people in regards to human rights is now those who consider themselves gay, homosexual, lesbian. The judgment as to whether you can trust the future, the social advancement, depending on people, will be judged on where they come out on this question. Look when he said this. He said this around 63. Today, how well you will be accepted comes based on how you come out on the question of the LGBTQ movement. This is a multi-generational roadmap. Baynard Rustin. So what do? Do we give him the name of a school? Of course. We have schools named after him. We actually have 3 schools. John Dewey. We know about the Dewey Decimal System. He was really clear. He said, there's no God, there's no soul. Hence, there's no needs for the props of traditional religion. With dogma and creed excluded, immutable truth is dead and buried. There is no room for fixed natural laws or moral absolutes. So what do we do for Dewey? We give him schools. Horace Mann, he said what the church has been for the medieval man, the public school must become for the democratic and rational man. God would be replaced by the concept of public good. Look when he was born, 20 years after the US, 1776. He died in 1859. He is the father of both Canadian and the US education system. When you Google who has the biggest influence on the Canadian education system, two people come up, and Horace Mann is one of them. Dewey died in 52, Mann in 1859. So do we have Horace Mann Elementary School? Yes. Do you know how many more we have? That many. This man said what? God will be replaced by the concept of public good. This is how we honor him. John Dunphy in the Human Manifesto said, "I'm convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith." Teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity together with all its adjacent evils and misery. We need people to stand up and see this for what it is. They have laid this out so clearly. National Education Association, Paul Hobner for the NEA. The schools cannot allow parents to influence the kind of values, education their children receive in school. That's what's wrong with those who say there's a universal system of values. Our humanistic manifesto goals are incompatible with theirs. We must change their values. And so what happens in Canada? We see legislation like Bill 89 that came out in 2017. Michael Coteau, he was the Minister of Child and Family Services. He said, "I would consider that a form of abuse when a child identifies one way and its caregivers are saying, no, we need to do this differently. If it's abuse and it's within the definition, a child should be removed from that environment." So what a lot of people do is they get mad at the politicians, but really Michael Coteau is a product of multi-generational discipleship in higher education. And this legislation then is downstream of what's happening. Illinois did the exact same thing. They followed this. This is also in 17. They followed Ottawa almost immediately. Canada has a great impact. I went through this bill on page 102. It says, "In no instance should an LGBTQ youth be placed with a non-affirming caregiver who's opposed to sexual orientation that's different from the caregiver's own." And so actually I was talking about this in 2017, and I said, how long will it be if it's abuse in the foster system, because that's what this law was, if you have an LGBTQ in a Christian home in the foster system, they will remove it. How long do you think that will take to go to biological children? And a lot of people were, yeah, it'll never happen. Well, it happened in 2018, and now we see it happening all the time. Gender dysphoria. The onset of gender dysphoria seems to occur in the context of belonging to a peer group. So one of the things that we see with gender dysphoria is that when one child identifies, for example, as trans or non-binary or whatever, what happens is now a whole group of them because it becomes cool. So this study happened out of Brown University. It's a fairly famous study that proved, this was, it was published August 16th. Science Daily kind of made it famous, August 22nd of 2018. And it basically says this is kind of a harmful mechanism, that a lot of gender dysphoria is not permanent, but gender dysphoria is coming because of kind of this societal wave and push. Well, what happened to that research? It's interesting that the Pauls and Timothys, even in their own universities, shut down their own professors' research. This is reported in the Federalist. Notice this was within a few days of the Science Daily, August 22nd to the 31st. Brown had issued a statement. Brown community members expressed concern that the conclusions of the study could be used to discredit efforts to support transgender youth and invalidate the perspectives. So what we see here is the people pushing the ideology don't care about the truth. They're after lies. And so what happens? They literally, Brown University deleted the study. So what we get is the father of lies likes us to talk about gender affirmation surgery. And so they literally rename things instead of genital mutilation. In Florida right now, they're saying the Don't Say Gay bill. Nowhere in the bill does it say gay. It says parents should be able to be in charge of their own teachers' understanding of gender and sexuality. So what they want to do is they want to silence, they want to change. For those of you who have home educated kids, grandkids, or you know it, this is where they're going. It was interesting that May, June, Harvard Magazine dedicated, because this was during the pandemic, they were seeing this exodus and parents were so vitriolically upset because parents now during the pandemic, what was happening? They were actually seeing what their kids were being taught by these teachers who had been taught by their Pauls and Timothys. And so they said there's a large risk with home education. And so Bartolet was the main person in this. And she said, requiring children to attend schools outside the home for 6-7 hours a day, she argues, does not unduly limit parents' influence on the child's views and idea. The issue is, do we think that parents should have 24/7, essentially authoritarian control over their children from 0 to 18? I think that's dangerous. Bartolet says, I think it's always dangerous to put the powerful people in charge of the powerless and to give the powerful ones total authority. So, who else said this in history? It's the exact same way of this discipleship. Your kids need to stand in a new camp. I don't care who you are. We need them in a state institution from the earliest aspect that they can. All of this, though, what I see with parents is a panic mode, a fear mode right now, rather than an excited expectation. And one of the things that I think we forget, and I want to just, as we go into kind of the last, I would say, fourth of this, or the last fifth of this presentation, is let us not forget. I want to go over the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. What I love about this is it starts with our Father. We have a relationship. God is ready. He is able to hear us. It says our Father, also says where he is. He's in heaven. So location also gives his ability. Not only do we have relationship, we have access, but we have access to a power that can actually make a change. Hallowed be your name, right? It's to make it holy, to sanctify. It's the same word used in 1 Peter 3:15. Sanctify yourself and then be ready to give a defense for the hope that's within you. Obviously, we need to do this with gentleness, meekness, respect. Your kingdom come, your will be done. We need to remember he is sovereign. He is the king on earth as it is in heaven. Our goal is to fill the earth with the knowledge of God as the water covers the seas. We have done a great job of understanding that we are a priest. We need a revival of understanding that we are both kings and priests. For you are a chosen people. You are royal priests. We're kingly priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. Revelation, twice it mentions, to him who loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood and has made us kings and priests to his God and Father. See, as a king, we have responsibility and authority. We need to not abdicate our authority and become escapist. We need to take a stand. A king. I love C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. In the very first book of the Chronicles of Narnia, There's a very simple man, and he drives a horse buggy. And Aslan in there is going to make him the very first king of Narnia. And he says, could you be king? And the man says, no, I'm not worthy of it. And he said, would you be the first one to go to battle and the last one to come in? And he's saying, would you take a stand? See, we are the light of the Lord. We need to walk as children of the light, for the fruit of light is found all that's good and true. We need to try to discern what's pleasing to the Lord. We need to take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. David writes, who will stand up for me against evildoers? Who will take his stand for me against those who do wickedness? We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. We need to get this spirit back into us. It's recorded twice in Ezekiel to be a watchman, give them a warning. It says, if you don't warn them, you will be held responsible for their blood. We need to sanctify Christ in our hearts. We need to be prepared to give a defense. We need to do it with respect. So that is the groundwork of multi-generational discipleship that really the third education revolution is trying to get back. We want to redeem education. We want to restore it back to the church within an ecosystem of veritas and virtue. Now, really, what does that really mean? Right now, we are at a unique challenge point. So most educators in most parts of the world have lost their way. A teacher may know whether a student is a boy or a girl, but they're afraid to say it. Okay, so what we need to do, this is a big problem. The second problem is for those parents who can't afford a biblical worldview education, a private education, it's become an expensive privilege. So I can take in, sadly, in my family, my sister-in-law and her husband went to prison. He did some things that were horrible. She has 6 children. She has absolutely no way to send her children to Christian private school. It's completely outside of that. She also, because she's barely making ends meet, also really doesn't have the opportunity for home education. If she leaves her 15-year-old home, who's a boy, more than likely, what will he be involved with? Video games or pornography. If leaves a gal home, about 1/3 of porn is done by gals. Maybe her young daughter would be involved in that as well, or TikTok or all of the other things, but education probably, so an undiscipled education really isn't an education. Online education, what we learned during COVID, online education doesn't work. It has to be a proctored education. So character development has been abandoned within higher education. They don't want to do that. So we have people who can become brilliant engineers and they still are brilliant doctors. I was reading of a dentist who made millions of dollars by breaking his patient's teeth. Highly educated, brilliant person. And in yesterday's news, he's looking at 10 years, I believe it is, for every event that he did this. So he got his license to steal because character has been abandoned. We are at a convergence now where we can bring in subject matter experts into homes. So the solution is to return education to the church. I would also even say the family. So third education is a proposal of hybrid e-learning. This is not online learning. This is church-based academic pastor overseeing the educational progress of their student. In my family, we sent our kids to private school, and my oldest son, and I'll have a couple of slides on him, was in 7th grade. He was remediated at Denver Christian in Colorado. What happened was my wife was really bothered by the fact he was behind, and she opted to pull him out and do home-based education. That she oversaw his education, and it was an online education where she became his academic pastor. Fast forward to when he was 18 years old, he graduated from the University of Washington with a science degree and got his doctorate at 21 years old in San Francisco. He actually became a dentist. That's what some of my dentist analogies are from. And so what we see is where students will come into a church overseen by a youth pastor 2.0, youth pastor who maybe is a homeschool mother, an academic pastor who will walk students through a hybrid education. We need a new dictionary, a new encyclopedia, new relational media. So here are some brief takeaways. We need to have at least the atheistic, diabolical value of children. We need to see children are a blessing, not money. We need to value them more than our atheistic counterparts. We need a new vehicle for educational discipleship. We need to build a solid biblical worldview for a flourishing nation. We need to see this as a real spiritual battle. Our enemy is devouring the next generation. A lot of this can be further understood in the book, The Third Education Revolution. The link is in there, but I want to give you an encouragement. And this is a different multi-generational educational model. And so I want to look at Esther 4 and Exodus 32. And Esther 4 says, if you keep silence at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews in another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come out to the kingdom for such a time as this. Most people look at this and they forget that this is actually Mordecai's rebuke. He is pushing. He says, who knows? And this is what I would like to say to Christians today. This may now be our time. Moses stood at the gate of the camp in Exodus 32, and he says, who's on the Lord's side? And some people came to him, and it saved the people. It saved the nation. My son was in some very unique silos. So this was my son who was remediated in the 7th grade in Denver Christian, finished up at the University of Washington when he was 18. He was accepted to dental school in a secular school in San Francisco. So if we look at silos, one of the worst cities, I would say for worldview silo in the world is San Francisco. The second silo, I would say that's one of the worst silos in any city, anywhere in the world, is the academic silo. Within that silo of academics, the worst silo to be involved in is the LGBTQ community. My son saw a cult was invited to the diversity and inclusion, which is the LGBTQ club at his secular university, his secular graduate school. And he said, who is going to reach these people? Who is going to tell them the truth? Who is going to love them enough? And he said, I was wondering if Christians can come just like a cult came to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. His dean responded, and the head of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee said yes. So he invited himself, along with the guy, Ben Dronov, who came out of, his father was raised under Ceausescu in Ukraine, and his Ukrainian brother in Christ, they're really the only two in San Francisco there. And they said, we're going to bring about a Christian worldview perspective. And so they advertised this all over the school. And so here's my son in front of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee in a secular university going over this. We can absolutely make a difference. Now, he was trained, he was prepared, he had all of these things that were kind of ready for him. This is not something I would recommend somebody who hasn't gone through this training, but this absolutely can happen. And so thank you for your time. I'm going to stop sharing. These are some of the things that I share on. I appreciate you taking the time, Don, and I'd open this up or give this back over to Don.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, David. Covered a lot of ground there, and at the end really just touched on the whole third education revolution. But we'll open it up for comment or conversation or further questions to David. I know you're involved in a lot of projects. You've been very involved in Africa as well. It's kind of be interesting to hear more on your work there. And I noticed particularly in Nigeria being the keynote speaker for the
INT. Yeah, both Bruce and I had the privilege of serving together. We were the to borrow a horrible phrase, we were the yin and the yang of a Institute for National Transformation. I think I had as much fun teaching there with Bruce as I've ever had teaching, co-teaching anywhere in my life. So that was a lot of fun.
Very good. Maybe we'll put that open for any questions or comments. I think, well, currently, David, where are your primary areas of involvement on the educational front? You're involved in
so
there's a lot of initiatives that,
So Dave Glesney, Bruce, myself, Vishal, and Andreas Wieland sit on the steering committee. Vishal, Andreas, and I would be considered the global directors of Third Education Revolution, whatever that means. We're obviously just a loosely affiliated. There is no org, but we're just kind of pushing this ahead as it is right now. I've had the privilege, obviously, to spend a lot of time with Vishal, even since 2009, been teaching with him specifically on education. I'll be back in DC. I'm presenting for a lobbyist group, the Family Research Council, on I think it's April 12th with Tony Perkins. We'll be going over a lot of the same material. I also present to different legislative bodies. I did earlier to one in Arkansas, and the Board of Education has invited me back. I'm doing a Worldview Summit there on the 22nd and 23rd. I also do, homeschool conferences, trying to do what we can in order to get this out. Vishal and I were in Mar-a-Lago with Turning Point USA. They're starting Turning Point Faith. And so we're hoping to integrate with some of the things with that. As far as Africa goes, things are happening so quickly, I would say kind of all over, but it's a big umbrella. The thing that I would say right now, Dr. Glesny and I are most excited about is we have a university, and it's actually looks like it will be a group of universities. Dr. Glesny signed an MOU in order to basically go from middle school is the goal all the way through undergraduate. So if we can get students into a like a William Jessup University style model where they can, you could get 10 or 15 students to go to a church. They could get some of the world-class education, subject matter experts brought in, where they could get their character development overseen by them. What we would love to see is when those kids hit like grade 11, they could start full-time with like a William Jessup, because what we're finding is a lot of these hybrid kids are so much further ahead than the public school kids. And they could then potentially, by the time they're 20, finish up a 4-year degree, all within their private Christian school, their church, or even at home. And so what has been unbelievable is the response of William Jessup has been, how can we get this tuition at a level that matches state education? And so I met with Vishal, and I met with the vice president of Grand Canyon Education, Dr. Mobley, and he's their vice president for expansion and innovation. What Grand Canyon University did is they just said, we're going to make our university's education cost the exact same as a state education. And they went from, not a lot of in the thousands to almost 100,000 students. They're I'm going to air quote Christian. They have some very strong Christian things in there. There's some other things that are definitely a big challenge, but they going to this model, they had about $1 billion of investment, and you can look up their ticker symbol. It's LOPE. They make it again, Dave. LOPE. Their EBITDA off of that $1 billion investment, they're doing, I think, in the high twos. They make about 280 to 300 million every year profit. And so this model not only would be self-sustaining to bring subject matter experts in, but I also believe that it's one of the only things that's going to really change our nation is we have to take back education, because I see almost everything is downstream, and it's infected so many churches now, and so many movements that are just totally at wholesale abandoning the biblical worldview of, so that's basically where we are right now. I have that meeting coming up. I think in an hour and 15 minutes. Doesn't that sound about right, Dave? So I was with the Bible Project this morning, which was early, meeting with them.
Yeah.
I had a meeting in Germany, went to Dave's prayer meeting here, William Jessup, and then I have actually one more meeting after that. So that's my day.
A link or a document for that model, or kind of more information on that?
The best one is if Dave Glesney is an expert on the academic pastor model, and Dave will put his contact information. He'll get anybody as much information. He actually is the CEO and is running this model. He is everything I say about it. I am his radical, I'm his third generation understudy, because he's actually done it. So he is the president of Virtues Campus. And also, in addition to that, Bob Rhymes is also running his own Virtues Campus. And so they would be far better spokespersons, I believe, for the reality. So if Bob, you don't mind throwing your contact info out there, because these are two gentlemen who know how to do this.
In fact,
I'm getting there, but Dave, can you comment on what the aspect of this that goes down to whatever you said, whether it was middle school or the idea of incorporating lower grade levels into the whole idea?
Yeah, so the basic discussion I'm having with a large learning center that's being developed, in addition to that, so it's a church network. It's called the Abide Church Networks. And I'm also having a conversation with Converge Church Networks. There's about 3,000 churches.
Wow.
One of the things that we know what is going to happen when you recruit students who have gone through public education and now they're going into college, the chances of you getting those students is next to nothing. So really what you're doing is you're recruiting homeschool students and you're recruiting private school students. Most private school students are going to go to a private Christian university because most of them, their parents are doing quite well. The homeschool ones then become the target. But the problem with that is that that pie is so small. So what we're working with is home education, celebrities, people that are out there. If we can then help people to transition from public school into home education that's accredited. So there's a number of people who don't want to do homeschool because of just kind of how they view homeschool.
Yeah, sure.
And so we know that if we can go, no, this is, Liberty University, this is Colorado Christian, or this is William Jessup University. This is their accredited thing, and your student will have a guaranteed spot should they able to, and I'm going to make up GPA. I don't have an MOU, but should your student have a 3.5 from their grade 6, we'll start dual enrollment. And by the time your kid's 20, they'll have an engineering degree from, I'll just use William Jessup University. They'll have a biology degree. They might have to take their final year when they're 19 there, but they're also going to do this for, under 35, 40 grand.
Yeah.
And
All
in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and so we're able to match maybe Grand Canyon, because Grand Canyon all in, they're about $8,000 a year. And they offer, 70 different degrees. And so if we can start the pipeline way down, and so my goal is, so I have a meeting with the ACSI, the Association of Christian Schools International, is why don't we do this with every Christian school in America? Why don't we, and my goal, this is what I'll actually be sharing today in the thing with William Jessup, is if I can go to every Christian school in America and I say, you know what, can we do dual enrollment? You keep your teachers. We're going to give you a $4,000 educational package. You charge your 10, 12, whatever you're charging. But let's get them dual enrollment, but let's not have them stop going when they're seniors. Let's have them go S1, S2, so they stay an extra 2 years in the private Christian school.
Right.
And now they have 4-year degrees. See, that could change the financial model radically. And I think once we get enough of these, if we could get 1,000, 1,500 of these learning centers, it's going to take a lot of the stigma away from that, because right now there's a huge shift with the cost of college education. About 160 schools in the next, they say 12 to 18 months are going to go out of business. And
Right.
so my son, actually my 15-year-old's in college right now. I should send out his paper. I had him, his English professor, he just did a paper on student debt. When you look at, the other thing is professor salaries are not going up. If you go back, and I have to look at his paper, I think it's 1980, 75% of all professors were on tenure. If you go to today, 75% of all college professors are not on tenure. They have no even ability to get tenure. Adjunct professors, which make roughly 1/10 of a tenured professor, have skyrocketed in their use. Administration costs have outpaced inflation 19%. Student services, that would be all of your diversity inclusion people, your CRT, critical race theory, all of that has outpaced inflation 29%.
That's a growth.
It's not university professors. So what's interesting is my son's research that he did is, if you take this and this and you remove that, you can actually keep university teachers paid where they should be paid. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so the tech world, we're at that convergence right now of both a need is really high, especially in Africa, India, and the rest of the world. And we have the tech to be able to deliver it.
The tech is important. No, it's good. Canadian situation is probably somewhat different. Colin, I think you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I just have a comment. Thank you, David. That was very, I could identify with 100% with what you were saying. One of the odd things, which you may know about Ontario, is we have a separate school system.
Yeah.
And one of the highest groups that are enrolling in the separate school system are the Muslim kids, because the Muslims feel that Catholic education and Muslim educational goals are much closer than the public system's goals are.
That's actually the truth. So I ask this question when I talk to parents, is I say, how many of you parents would send your kids to a Muslim school? How many of your parents would send your kids to a Buddhist school? How many of your parents would send it to a Marxist atheist school? Because I would send my kids to a madras before I would send them to a public school myself, because at least they're going to learn some things about virtue and things like that. So, but sadly, I think it's Vodi Bakum said so famously, you send your kids to Caesar and you're surprised when they come home Romans. I think that sentiment for Muslims is they understand, at least in a Catholic school, they'll understand authority, being made in the image of God, male and female, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, David, if you might, or Dave Glesney, just comment a bit on the whole Virtues Campus project, which is kind of in some sense closely related, obviously, to the issues that David talked about.
I was hoping to figure out how I can leverage that.
Oh, someone,
You want to mute
David.
Bob? You can mute him, Don, if you want.
Yeah.
I didn't get to see it. I just had lunch with Kent Shaw.
Oh, sorry, who's that?
Yeah, I know.
It's Bob. I think he had to take a call.
So, yeah.
Can you mute him?
Okay. Yeah.
There we go.
Yes.
There we go.
So Dave, yes, very much. You're really kind of at the center of the whole Virtues Campus program. and that's
Yes.
kind of new to us here in Canada as well, in terms of what's really how that's developed.
Well, just a couple thoughts, just a very skeleton. I can't go into detail. First
Yeah.
of all, I did put my email address on my email
Your email is in the chat there.
in the chat box. So if you
Thank
would
you,
like
Dave.
to contact me, yep, it's in the chat.
Excellent.
david.leveragescampus.com. I'd be willing to send you materials or to have conversation with you in more detail.
Yeah.
But just very basically, what Virtues Campus does comes alongside local churches, helping them double up as college classrooms Monday through Friday. We're a 2-year program. David has been talking about that. They are overseen by an academic pastor who walks with them during those 2 years, teaching, facilitating, discipling them, mentoring them, guiding them on the local church campus. So there are 3 elements to it. There's a host church needs to be willing to open up their facility so we can hold classes on the local church campus. We need an academic pastor who is the one that walks with and disciples. Really the key to the whole thing is the academic pastor, and then
Right.
a partner university. And right now we have 4 partner universities. We're growing our network. We have Crown College here in Minnesota and Iowa. We have Colorado Christian University in Colorado and Pillar College. We're working with them in New Jersey. And then just most recently, William Jessup University in California. So we're growing our network of partner universities. Our challenge is to open up churches for church pastors and churches to step forward and to embrace education.
Right. And in the U.S., the extensive Christian college network in some ways is quite distinct from what we have here in Canada, far less developed in some ways. I'm not really, you can count the number, I guess, of Christian colleges in Canada on 2 hands or a couple of hands. Compared to in the U.S., it's a very extensive network that you're working with. But mention was made to Vishal Malawali, who's really kind of has been a kind of inspiration to much of the whole thinking behind the third education revolution. And I do plan to have him as a guest speaker here once he's back from India. He's in India right now, working on a number of major book publishing projects, but I'll share more of that later. But other questions, I'll leave it open, and we should not, should probably, it's 4, so we'll get 5 minutes perhaps for other questions, if there's questions or comments. And as there's additional information, then David, your presentation can be made available, and I have recorded the session as well. So any final comments or thoughts just from the conversation? We covered a lot of ground. Obviously, it's there's been a huge generational shift that we're in the midst of, and most of us are of an age where this, we grew up in a very different environment from what we now are seeking to kind of work in. That was striking to me too, the research of your son, David, that the university, there's something out of whack within the university system if it's now reliant on such, if you will, underpaid faculty, and that whole system seems to me is really going to implode in some ways. But I'm not sure in Canada to the degree that's the same is the case, but it's definitely kind of a situation I would think that would really also make the relationship of the faculty to students more problematic as well. Any other comments then or thoughts? I do appreciate your time, David. I know it's a full day that you have, but you've given a lot of thought to this, and there's some really pretty striking comments or contrasts that presented, that maybe some of us haven't really thought about in that way before. So I appreciate that. And we will be continuing on a regular basis with these conversations. I do have the Canadian director of Ratio, Christie, speaking in 2 weeks' time. And then also Robert Mann, who's the key figure in the Canadian Scientific Christian Affiliation, speaking in mid-April on rumors of transcendence from the world of physics, which will be very informative. But I thank you all for your time, and David, for your take time to share with us, and certainly we'll keep you posted. You're on the list. You get notifications of upcoming conversations as well. So, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, and we'll hope to see you again. And back here, and certainly there's a lot of information around the Third Education Revolution that's available if you do a search on that, and the book itself we're hoping to have available to distribute in Canada soon. All right, if that's it.
I have a quick question for Nancy.
David.
Are you going to be in the next meeting with William Jessup University?
No, I'm not. In fact, I just texted John that I was in this Zoom, and prayers for his next meeting that you're in.
Okay, great. Could you
All right.
send me your contact information before it? Then that way, I don't have a way to get a hold of you. Is
Sure.
why if
Do
you can just
Put it in the chat.
put that out there for everybody, Nancy. That'd be great, because then I can circle
Sure.
back for your board member.
Absolutely.
Okay, and Jackson, yes, a recording will be available. So I've got your put your email in to the chat, and I'll make sure you get the link for the recording. Okay, and Bob, nice to have Bob Ryan. Nice to have you here. I don't think we've met, but it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
And that,
Hey, the two Davids, can I just ask you, I'm very interested in what the Jessup conversation is going to be about. Is there any issue with me being involved with that call?
I don't think so, but
I wouldn't think so.
I'll send you the link, Bob.
Okay.
I've invited my assistant, so there's going to be someone else there as well.
Yeah.
Ian, on a
Can I be your assistant, Bob?
No, I'll be your assistant.
okay, you guys
Trust me. I meant to be on the very first one, but that was, I had an unavoidable conflict on that.
Yeah.
And David, if it's appropriate for me to join that too, since Destiny might be among the first to endeavor on this model with Jessup, I'm happy to participate. I do have a meeting later, but if I can attend and it's helpful.
Yeah, it's at 4:15 to 5. That would be Central Time. So that's an hour and 15 minutes from now is when it starts, actually.
Okay.
Well, that sounds
Sorry
like
with all the
important
time. I have to
meeting.
go to my.
Well, thank you again, David.
Let's
And
just
Nancy,
quickly,
nice to meet you
hold
as
on.
well.
Let's pray for them
And-
quickly.
Sorry, Bruce. Yes, please.
Father, I thank you for what David and Dave are involved in. And I really ask that you'd also rest on Nancy and Bob as they participate within this meeting. Lord, that you would continue to cause there to be incredible synergy and convergence of how these people are to be working together for the common end of really seeing your kingdom coming through the area of education. So we ask that you would be so present with them during this time. You would bless this meeting in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Bruce, so much.
Thank you, Bruce.
Jackson, I'll send you a recording. Where are you located, Jackson?
Bothell, Washington, so near Seattle.
Okay, pleasure. Well, thanks for joining us. All right, we will continue, stay in touch, and the recording will be available for you, those of you who would like a copy. All right, and I would assume, David, also then the slides would be available in.
Yeah, I can make a PDF of
Yeah,
the
PDF.
slide, so it's a little smaller and.
Excellent.
Not
Appreciate
a-
it. All right, and he certainly, as Bruce has prayed, that you will have good success in your meeting coming up. That sounds like a great opportunity emerging. So, all right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you.
and we will be in touch. There we copy the chat, and that's good. And Bob, whereabouts you've been involved quite a bit, haven't you, Bob, in the
Yeah, I'm in.
education revolution? I knew
Well, yeah.
Michelle many years ago, but I just got involved recently. So
Yeah, I've been involved for the last year and a half.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's about right. And but I knew Vishal from about a decade ago, a little over a decade ago,
Right.
and knew about Truth and Transformation, several other books, and
Excellent. Yeah.
so then in the end of 2019 or 2020,
Right.
I read the whole Third Education Revolution manuscript and realized, well, this is really something that needs to go forward, right?
Yeah. It is.
And then I was retiring from my professional practice in the financial planning arena,
Right.
and I'm a worldview guy. I studied with Chuck Colson back in the day
Wow.
when
You
he had,
know Nancy Piercy, then, I would think.
yeah, I know who she is, and just saw her speak at a church here in Denver.
Yeah.
About
She's a good friend from way back when she was
Oh,
here.
good. Yeah, no, she's great. I mean, I pretty much have all of her books and use them.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a fair amount of worldview teaching myself in churches, with kind of under the belief that the American evangelical church needs to get its mind
Yes.
a little bit more elevated and deepened, right?
Yes, and that's I think the challenge.
Yeah. So
Michelle's certainly thrown that down, that the loving God with your mind, the whole thing about the failure of the seminary to really.
yeah, right, exactly right. And so
it's a pleasure, and perhaps I'll have you, if you were willing, at some point, share a presentation here as well. We kind of keep
I'd love to do that. I've got my main interests from a more academic perspective, even though I'm a marketplace guy, are number one, what I'm working on these days, because I've also been quite involved with the Acton Institute. I don't know if you know.
Of course I know that. Yes.
Okay.
Very, very good work. Yes.
And I got introduced to them through Chuck Colson back in the day, right?
Okay. Yes.
Robert Sirico and Colson were good friends.
Yeah.
And Colson had a very ecumenical streak in his thinking, right?
Yes.
The evangelicals and Catholics together stuff and all that. So anyway,
Yeah, I mean, it's broad.
So then in my professional life, I spent the latter half of it really focusing on entrepreneurship and privately held businesses, right? Family owned, privately held businesses and their transitions and all that. And many of them, of course, are Christians, right? Yeah. They're overrepresented in that world, which is good. It was good. But this intersection of faith and economics is an area that gets very little attention.
Yeah.
And now I have strong backgrounds in both. Yeah. And I'm bringing together that a part of worldview training has got to help Christians and pastors and other people in churches understand the importance of the economic realities of freedom, religious freedom, economic freedom, and so on.
Yeah.
And all this stuff ties into the kind of stuff David was talking about today.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah. And it's the best practices in business, from Jim Collins on down up, are totally applicable to a Christian organization. The insights there resonate, so much with what, how a Christian organization should work in terms of.
That too. But I'm thinking at a larger sort of social awareness of what is the good of free markets.
Yeah.
Now they have to have virtue and social trust and high virtue, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise they don't function. And
I
a lot of things
agree.
we have to solve about income inequality and all these other things. But free markets are the only thing that will create wealth.
Yeah, and this is so missing in the university system, right? There's a
totally, because they're just dead set against it.
I was very much a student of Gary North way back in terms of a lot of his work, and Rees Mogg book on inflation, The Reigning Error. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not.
But his critique of inflation and what's be involved in that is a very brilliant book.
Sure.
It's sad because within the university, very few seem to come out with proper understanding of economics, the basic elements that really make for prosperity. Like wealth poverty is not a problem. We can explain, but how do we explain wealth? What is it that
Yeah,
generates
well,
wealth?
nobody seems to know that, and that the answer is there is a formula for it that actually works, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just, ever since I started doing stuff at Acton, my mind has kind of gotten blown up about all that, because I've also experienced in my everyday practice that I had for, the second half of my career, watching businesses either flourish or not flourish, and what were the reasons. It's all about human capital and about the ability of leadership in organizations to do the right thing for people, not to just be greedy, right? That's not how that works.
No, that's right, and it's the human resources, and that really, if you treat your people well and value
and invest in them, right? Yeah,
exactly. That is really the real vehicle for success in business.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, it's very, very good to talk with you, and the work of the Acton Institute. I mean, I started my own company many years ago, an internet service company, Net Access Systems in Canada, but I also came out of an academic background in history and philosophy of science and faith and science issues.
Oh, cool. Well, that's one of my secondary big interests is
the
myth of the conflict between Christianity and science.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a very rich literature.
Well, that's why you know Nancy Pearcey, right?
Yes, of course.
She and Daxton wrote, the book on, I forgot the title of it right now, but I read it. And that's where I first really got introduced to those ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very, and there's the Open University in the 1970s did a course called Science and Belief, Copernicus to Darwin.
Yeah.
And then Science and Belief, Darwin to Einstein. But it really laid out the fundamental, issue. And ultimately, it's a lot of material relating to the Christian worldview combined with Greek tools, conceptual tools, led to the rise of modern science in the 17th century or in the late Middle Ages. So there's a lot to learn there. And most people live with that very false notion that somehow science rendered biblical belief.
God. Yeah. Well, then my last big interest in the worldview space, which has been very consistent for about 20 plus years, is the origins controversies. And when I was done with my Colson training, went back to some of the conferences they have each year, just a couple of years after I finished the training. And I got to listen to a 5-time Nobel Prize nominee who was a physical chemist. His name is Fritz Schaefer. He wrote a book called Christianity and Science, Conflict or Coherence. He's a professor at
Fritz Schaefer.
Fritz Schaefer, yeah. He's a physical chemist professor at Atlanta. What's the private university there? I'm just spacing it right now. But anyway, he gave a talk. This is in 2006.
Right.
Yeah, 2006. About the actual state of research in the field of abiogenesis, which is origin of life, right? And it was absolutely fascinating to hear him explain that nobody has any idea whatsoever. And this is like one of the world's, top
the best
scientists in chemistry and living things and all that, right? And he just laid it all out, from Francis Crick and Watson to all these other people with all these bizarre ideas about it. Nobody has any idea. And then I have also read lots of work from Stephen Meyer. I was a big fan of Phil Johnson.
I know.
And then even in Michael Behe as well, right? And these people have now proven mathematically for sure that
the name escaping me, but the mathematics.
And the reason I got so interested in that, Don, is because my original academic background is in linguistics.
Okay, interesting.
And there is actually this huge confluence of realities about how language works. And how the language of life works. Right?
Information.
Specified information, right? and I'm very sensitive to that. I have, a master's degree in linguistics, and that's a field that I enjoy. But it helped me understand there's no way that there wasn't a mind behind what we have.
Absolutely. And that our talk with Robert Mann, Department of Physics from University of Waterloo on the 13th of April is on rumors of transcendence, but it really looks at
that's a great title.
Development. And but yeah, Nancy Piercy, of course, is very good on these issues. She wrote popularly, and her book.
Oh yeah, I know. And I actually asked her. I went up and introduced myself and asked her at this talk she gave here in Denver, which was was all on the transgender. It was from her book Love Thy Body.
Yes.
And so it was more on that topic.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask her. I didn't get a chance to talk to her very long, but my sense is it is time for prominent Christians and Christian intellectuals to revisit this issue of what I would characterize as the biggest intellectual hoax in the history of science, which is the neo-Darwinian synthesis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what I learned, on top of that is the beauty of it, the way it really is that God created tremendous flexibility in the kinds of beings that He created to adapt.
Yeah,
for sure. So-called microevolution, but this idea that we went from one to the other in this gradual process of undirected evolution is patently scientifically and mathematically false, and always has been.
I know. I mean, I've got a wonderful encyclopedia of human physiology. I just open any page and say, okay, what's the evolutionary mechanism? There's nothing. It's so complex. And
right.
But I think the cosmology in those broad terms is kind of the high ground culturally. Like, as long as the naturalistic evolutionary cosmology dominates our university, Christians are always going to have an uphill struggle. They're always going to.
Right. But my point is, what I've noticed as I observe, I know there's now some atheistic philosophers. For example, what's the guy's name who just wrote the book called?
Not Berlinski, but there is.
Well, Berlinski would, but he's always been critical of that, right? As a mathematician, right? And I like some of the things he's written. He's kind of an oddball. Yeah. But I've seen Stephen Meyer actually interview him, and he's kind of weird. But more to the point is this idea that I'm watching atheist philosophers these are prominent people, and one who just recently wrote a book that I did get was basically why Darwinism is almost certainly false. Yeah. And then the first thing he says in the first chapter of the book is, he doesn't then. He assumes that there's still some other answer other than creation. It's like, when will you guys actually be able to look beyond your box of materialism?
Yeah,
right? Because of course materialism as a worldview is so impoverished. It can't explain.
It doesn't.
Right. It misses everything.
It doesn't help us understand ourselves in the most basic way.
Right. It's limited. It's a closed system, right?
But it's a system that's led to incredible suffering. If we look at Marxism,
absolutely, but that's because they become handmaidens, right? Yeah. They are drawn to one another because of the lack of any transcendence, right? And so they automatically align with each other, even if they don't have all that much in common necessarily.
Yeah, and it's a huge indoctrination that occurs in terms of that kind of naturalistic evolutionary view at all levels. Stanley Yockey, I don't know if you're familiar with the Benedictine. He's a priest and physicist, but he gave the Gifford lectures in 1978 and 79 called The Road of Science and the Ways to God. It's brilliant.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of him, but I didn't know about that.
We've got like one of the things at the Oak Center is we've got a really huge collection on faith and science.
Well, cool.
Material. just putting that
Well,
together.
I should know more about that because
Yeah, I'll share some with you, but I think my burden is really to provide the resources that are necessary for academic ministry and for students who are going into graduate studies to really have the resources they need in this, But Darwin, like I did my dissertation on William Whewell, who was master of Trinity College, and he died in 1866. But he coined the term scientist in the English language, actually, founder of the British. And his last book, The Philosophy of Discovery, looked into the whole theistic implications of science, and it was published in 1860. And there's no reason why science couldn't have developed and opened up in that very rich theological context.
right.
But instead, the shift to naturalism with Darwin, that's a mystery. It is a big mystery how that happened still. It wasn't inevitable in any way. The sciences up to that point did not necessarily lead to that kind of a view.
Right. No, I know that. And I've always wondered,
Yeah.
but I don't know, something in my spirit tells me that there was enough influence, through combination of the Enlightenment and other ideas, and human hubris, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And a high level of actual ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Because there's all this stuff that Darwin had no idea about, right?
No, it's
He didn't know 10 cents about a cell, right? I mean, it was just a blob of whatever, right? So the hubris, the lack of real knowledge, and the complexity of life, for example, which thousands and thousands of times more complex than he had any idea
No,
about, right?
that's exactly right.
And of course he did say, if it should come out that certain things are not as I expect, then maybe this won't work, that kind of thing. That's about as humble as he got. And to me, it's this road from this road from being willing to be subject to God, to a creator, and this human propensity to say, and like I like to say it, I call it giving God the finger,
Yeah, well, exactly, and that the revolutionary faith. There's James Billington wrote a book called Fire in the Minds of Men, and it's the revolutionary faith. I mean, go back certainly into the 18th century and even earlier, but that and then the whole development of atheism. I mean, through Hegel and Marx, all that. It's incredible, that generation. 1830 to 1860 was the pivot, really, when it really swung
in Europe.
So we've got but I think that's critical, and it's great. I mean, the Acton Institute. Are you actively involved in or on the board or something?
Well, no, I'm not that active, but I went to it from 15 on until they didn't have their thing for the last 2 years, but they're having it again this year, which I'll look to.
Well, excellent. Well, I really appreciate getting to meet you, Bob, this way, and I think it's very exciting. The community that's emerging from the Vichel's work really is
absolutely, pretty diverse group of people.
Absolutely. Who would have thought, right? To bring this together. Well, look, we'll keep in touch.
So I assume I've got your email somewhere.
Let me just actually, if I just put this in the chat here.
Yeah.
And then if you can send me an email. My email is very simple.
I'm going to jot it down.
Now there it goes. It's in the chat, and it's simply don@dhmcnally.ca. There it is.
Great.
And
I'll get it down, and I'll send you an email so you've got mine. Okay?
I appreciate that. It's obviously got a lot of common interest, both on the business and on the science side of things.
That's great.
I'm looking with these kind of inkling conversations really open up a wide range of conversation around issues of fundamental.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great.
Excellent. Okay, you've got my email.
Thanks.
And we'll look forward to staying in touch then, Bob.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Right, excellent. Bye then.
Bye-bye.
Copy the chat here for a second.
Yeah, hang on one second.
You got it there. Did I get that?
No, I got Nancy Shorts.
Oh, just a second.
Jackson Campbell.
Why isn't that showing up?
I don't know.
I wonder if,
Because we're still on the same Zoom
yeah,
call.
well, here it is anyway, just Don
Yep,
at, and then DH
yep,
McNally.ca.
got it. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. We'll look
Thank
forward
you.
to then, Bob. And we'll see you soon. Bye then.
Bye-bye.